Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here on time. We're going to start with a short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niratayame. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muniye Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muniye Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muniye Soha.
Okay, so last week we started to look at the close placement of mindfulness of feelings. This is the second of the 4 close placements of mindfulness, or the 4 establishments of mindfulness. There's different terms for these. So the first one was on the body, and we spent several weeks on that. And then last week we started on feelings. So let's do some meditation tonight related to that. First of all, make sure you're sitting in a comfortable position, conducive position for meditation. Try to keep your back straight. Let your shoulders relax. Let go of any tension you may have in your body. Imagine your body being as light, relaxed, free of tension, like a cloud. Let your breathing be a natural rhythm, each breath flowing in and out without you controlling your breathing, but just allowing the body to breathe in a natural way. And let your awareness follow the breath as it's coming in and going out. Let go of any other thoughts there may be in your mind about things you were doing today or any other time in the past. Just put the past aside for now. And also the future, and let your mind wander away to what you're planning to do later tonight, tomorrow, and so on. Put aside all those thoughts. Just let your mind rest in the present moment, present place, wherever you are. Just being aware of the gentle and natural flow of the breath in and out. So let's take a few more moments to make sure we have a really good positive motivation for why we're here. We're having this class, looking at a portion of the Ornament for Clear Realizations. This is a text explaining the bodhisattva's path, what a bodhisattva needs to do to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. These are really precious teachings, and it's good if we have as our reason, our motivation for joining this class, a similar motivation to that of the bodhisattvas. So they're totally determined to do everything they can to become a Buddha and benefit all beings. So if you're comfortable thinking that way, that that's your goal as well, then you can think that that is your reason for joining this class. If that seems difficult, you're not yet sure if you have the ability to reach enlightenment, if that's really what you want to do, try at least to have a feeling of compassion and love for other beings, people and other kinds of beings. And you could think that you're here to learn ways in which you can be more loving and compassionate and more beneficial for others in your life as much as you can. Okay, so now for the meditation, before we start the actual class, focus your awareness again on your breathing and try to stay aware of each breath as it's coming in and going out. Bring your mind back to the breath when it wanders away. Start thinking about something or distracted by a sound. Just let go of that other thought, other object, and return your awareness to your breathing. Now continuing to be aware of the breath coming in and going out, expand your awareness to see if you can notice feelings. So there's always a feeling accompanying every one of our sense consciousnesses. We see something or hear a sound, smell an odor, taste something, or feel some sensation in our body, or have a thought, a memory, a mental image popping up. So with each and every one of these experiences, there's always a feeling, either a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. So as you're aware of your breath flowing in and flowing out, you may have feelings arising related to the breath, to other sensations in your body, to sounds that you hear, thoughts that pop up in your mind. And see if you can notice what kind of feeling accompanies each of these experiences. And just notice the feeling. You can give it a label like pleasant feeling or unpleasant feeling. And then just let it go and go back to the breath, watching the breath, and also watching for other feelings that may arise. Now ask yourself if any of these feelings are permanent. Are any of the feelings that we have like frozen, static, always there, always the same, never changing. It might be easier to understand this if we think about past feelings. So see if you can recall any feelings you've had earlier today. Either a very pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling. And check if that feeling lasted continuously, or was it something transitory and permanent? It came and then later it went. So these are some of the things we are meant to do with regard to feelings. First of all, to notice them in our experience. They're there, they're happening, they're arising. So to start noticing them, paying attention to them. And secondly, to notice if they are permanent or impermanent. And if we do it right, we should recognize that they are impermanent, that they change. They're not always there, always the same. They come and they go. So don't worry if you're not able to notice your feelings, or you're not able to notice if they are permanent or impermanent. So feelings are kind of subtle, and it may take time to get more familiar with them, to be able to understand them better. So don't give up if you're not able to do it right away. Just keep trying. And then another thing that we try to do with feelings is to notice what happens when we have a feeling, what it leads to. Because the Buddhist teachings explain that when we have a pleasant feeling, if we're not careful, then what can arise after that is attachment, grasping. There's different forms of that, some really strong, intense grasping and craving, or it could be sort of more mild and low level, like, yeah, I like that. I want more of that. So that's the usual course of events. Pleasant feeling leads to attachment, and an unpleasant feeling, again, if we're not careful, leads to the opposite feeling, aversion. And there's different forms of aversion. There can be strong anger, irritation, or even hatred and aggressiveness, wanting to do something kind of destructive to that person or object that we have this unpleasant feeling for. So this is what we are taught in the teachings, and we need to check our experience to notice if that is the case. That is what happens. So these afflictions like attachment, desire, craving, grasping, that state of mind, as well as aversion and anger, that state of mind, they don't just arise from nowhere for no reason, without any causes or conditions, but they arise because of causes and conditions. And one of the causes is an object. There's always an object towards which we have that affliction. But then there's also a feeling. Yeah. So first there arises a feeling about the object, either a pleasant or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. And then depending on what kind of feeling we have, the next thing that happens is one of the afflictions arises. So this is how it's explained in the teachings, and it's good for us to try to pay attention to what's happening in our mind and notice if this is the case. And I read I can't remember where I read this, but there's at least some schools of Western psychology that explain things in a completely opposite way, or at least the way they use the term emotion and feeling. Okay, so in Buddhism we say feeling comes first. Yeah, that's like the first initial experience we have towards an object, which could be a person or anything else. So the first thing that happens is a feeling, and then after the feeling would be an emotion like attachment or aversion or jealousy or whatever. So feeling comes first and then emotion. But I read that some schools of Western psychology explain it in the opposite way. They say that the first thing that happens is emotion, like fear, these kind of very primal experiences that occur, yeah, when we perceive some object, and then after, so they think of emotion as like the first reaction that we have. Then after that comes a feeling. So I think the way they're explaining emotions and feelings are not the same as in Buddhism, but I'm just explaining this because you might encounter this if you read or listen to talks about Western psychology. You might encounter this. Just to know that the way we use these terms in Buddhism isn't necessarily the same as the way that they are used in Western psychology. And there's probably, within Western psychology too, there's probably lots of different viewpoints and ways of explaining things. So I'm just trying to explain the Buddhist way of seeing things. So feelings comes first, and that's like very kind of simple and basic: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then after that, the mind will get into something more complex, such as attachment or aversion, or some other affliction. Not always; it doesn't always happen, but it often happens. And so this is why feeling is considered very important and something that we try to pay attention to, because these delusions, attachment, aversion, and so on, are the cause of suffering. They keep us in samsara, cause us to take rebirth again and again, and experience all kinds of problems. And so we want to work on those, reduce those, stop those. And so if we can pay more attention to our feelings, then we have a greater chance of stopping the process, before it gets more involved in these afflictive states of mind. Okay, so last week we looked at the main division of feelings into those three types: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And tonight, let's start looking at another way of dividing feelings, which is explained in the Satipatthana Sutra. We can have the slides. Okay, so the Satipatthana Sutra, Satipatthana means establishment of mindfulness or close placement of mindfulness. So the Satipatthana Sutra is the sutra in which the Buddha explained this practice that we're looking at here, these four establishments of mindfulness. So in that sutra, first the Buddha talks about just paying attention to feelings, noticing when there's a pleasant feeling or there's an unpleasant feeling or there's a neutral feeling. That's like the first step in practicing this type of mindfulness. Then after that, he goes on to talk about noticing worldly and unworldly feelings. And in the sutra, he doesn't really explain the difference between them, but there's a few sources that do explain this difference. So in the book Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, that I've mentioned a number of times before, this has quite a bit of information about the four establishments of mindfulness. So in that book, it says that worldly feelings arise from contact with sense objects, whereas unworldly or spiritual feelings arise when we practice the Dharma and align our minds with the Dharma. So that's one way of explaining the difference. And Bhikkhu Analayo, in his book on the establishments of mindfulness, he explains it in this way. He says the distinction between worldly and unworldly feelings is concerned with the difference between feelings related to the flesh, and my guess is that's talking about physical feelings. Yeah. And we looked at that last week. Physical feelings are those that accompany any of our five sense consciousnesses, because they are physical. Our five senses, the sense organs are physical, and the five sense consciousnesses depend on them. So, for example, eye consciousness or seeing, that depends on the physical organ, the eye. And so a feeling that accompanies an eye consciousness, when we see a beautiful object and have a pleasant feeling with it, that would be a type of physical feeling. So I'm guessing that's what he's talking about here. So worldly feelings, that's similar to what it says in the Following the Buddha's Footsteps, that worldly feelings are those related to sense objects or sensory experiences. And then unworldly feelings are feelings related to renunciation, our spiritual practice. And he says the basic point here is awareness of whether a particular feeling is related to progress or regress on the path. So that's one way of differentiating them. So it's probably easier if we look at some examples to have a better understanding of these. And each of these two divisions, worldly and unworldly feelings, has three divisions, which are the usual three types of feelings. Here it says painful, that's another way of saying an unpleasant feeling, and then pleasant and neutral. Okay, so first we'll look at worldly feelings. So an example of a painful worldly feeling would be when we see something ugly. Okay, we have a visual experience of something that looks really ugly or really grotesque or really frightening. Okay, so we have an unpleasant feeling. And likewise, if we hear a sound that is unpleasant that we don't like, or we smell an unpleasant odor, or we taste an unpleasant taste, or when we have some feeling in our body that's painful or uncomfortable. Okay, so those types of feelings would be painful worldly feelings. Then the second, pleasant worldly feelings. An example is when we hear nice music, music that we like. And yeah, so any other sound, like the singing of a bird, very sweet, you know, sweet sounding bird that's singing. So any kind of hearing experience, hearing a sound that we like, that we find pleasant, we have a pleasant feeling with that. And likewise with the other senses, when we see something pleasant, attractive, when we smell or taste something that's nice or feel a nice sensation on our body. So those would be examples of pleasant worldly feelings. And then for neutral worldly feeling, I put just, what for me would be a neutral feeling when seeing a telephone pole, because I hardly notice telephone poles. They're all over the place, especially along a road, but I hardly notice them. And so when I see a telephone pole, I don't really feel pleasant. I don't feel unpleasant. So for me, that's an example of a neutral feeling. So that might change for other people. Other people might have other objects that produce a neutral feeling in their mind. And so in the teachings, it said that neutral worldly feelings arise in ordinary beings who are oblivious to karma, and so they don't understand that the actions we do bring results. And so because of that, they're not really aware of the suffering that would be created if they do negative things. So neutral feelings can leave us kind of complacent and lazy. So I was thinking of one example of that, how that works is, people often just if they go for a walk, they walk along without really paying much attention to what they are walking on. Sometimes there are insentient beings, insects on the ground, on the path, on the road, and they just are oblivious to these beings, maybe don't even notice them or don't care. And they just stomp on them and crush them and so on. So I don't know if that's a correct example, but it seems like it could be. They have a neutral feeling in the sense that they're uncaring, indifferent, towards what they're walking on, and unconscious about what kind of karma they're creating, unaware. So this is a disadvantage to neutral feelings. People having a neutral feeling might engage in non-virtue without realizing it, but it's still non-virtuous. Just because you don't know that something is non-virtuous doesn't doesn't mean you don't create non-virtue. Okay, so I think it's easy to understand worldly feelings. Then unworldly or spiritual feelings. So an example of one that is painful would be a feeling of sadness when meditating on death. So there are certain topics that Buddha advised us to meditate on, and our teachers also advise us to meditate on. They say these are good for you to meditate on. But when we do meditate on them, then the feeling that we may have is an unpleasant one. Most people don't want to think about death, don't want to think that they're going to die and their friends and their family, their loved ones are going to die. So contemplating that, meditating on that, brings up a painful feeling. But this is because we never before wanted to think about such things as impermanence and death, and maybe we tried to avoid those topics, and so we never really faced our thoughts and feelings with regard to death. And the Buddha said it's very important for us to reflect on impermanence and death so that we get familiar with these realities. These things are going to happen to us, and they're going to happen to everyone else. And it's important for us to acknowledge that and accept that, and use that awareness of death, impermanence and death, to inspire our spiritual practice, to practice to the best of our ability, with the aim of reaching a state where we no longer have to die and take rebirth and go through all these other sufferings of samsara. And so even though initially our feeling may be uncomfortable, unpleasant, sad, but if we continue meditating on impermanence and death and use that awareness in the correct way, in a skillful way, then it brings benefit. And after some time, we probably won't have that feeling of sadness and unpleasantness when meditating on death, just an initial one. So I think it's helpful to know that such feelings are actually positive, are wholesome, because I think some people, when they have this notion that meditation should be only about really nice things, beautiful, pleasant things. It makes you feel good. It shouldn't make you feel uncomfortable or sad. Maybe some of you had that notion when you first started learning Buddhism and meditation. Because I hear people say it, I hear them say, no, why should we meditate on death? That's depressing. I don't want to meditate on something that's depressing. Yeah, same with suffering. There's a lot of meditations in Buddhism in the Lamrim about different kinds of suffering. So I'm sure all of us, when we first encounter these, we kind of go, whoa, I don't want to meditate on that. That's not pleasant. So I think it's kind of normal to have that notion that, meditation is all about good feelings, you feel good, peaceful, happy. And maybe popular culture as well promotes that kind of notion, that kind of idea. But according to Buddhism, there are at least some kinds of meditation that are uncomfortable, that make us kind of squirm and maybe want to run away. But this is a wholesome unpleasantness, a wholesome unpleasant feeling, because it will lead us, if we keep doing those meditations and using them wisely and skillfully, then they benefit our practice of Dharma, help us get enthusiastic about practicing Dharma. So we do have to face our mind and look at our conceptions about things and our feelings about things, and recognize those that are helpful and realistic and those that are not. So don't expect that, all Dharma practice, all types of meditation are going to make you feel good, make you feel pleasant. Okay, so, but on the other hand, it could be in some cases that if we have an unpleasant feeling when we're doing meditation, it could be because we're doing something incorrectly, or we just don't have the correct approach. Just as an example, let's say, you're trying to meditate on the Buddha, visualize the Buddha. We do that kind of practice a lot, visualization. And so you're trying to build up this mental image, this visualization of the Buddha, but maybe you have a really hard time doing it. You're just not able to get the visualization, or sometimes you get it and then it disappears, or you only get part of it, not all of it. It's often very frustrating trying to visualize. And so you may get frustrated and then maybe angry. Possible you get angry at the Buddha, or you get angry at your teacher for making you do this practice that's so hard that you can't do. And so there you have an unpleasant feeling. But I think in that case, that unpleasant feeling isn't something wholesome and something we want to cultivate. We want to, continue to cultivate again and again. But it's because of, we just don't understand correctly how to practice and how to deal with the difficulties that arise from practicing. So the point I'm trying to make here is that not all unpleasant feelings or painful feelings that we have when we're doing meditation are necessarily this type of unworldly spiritual feelings. Because, a feeling of frustration that you may get when you're meditating and unable to visualize or whatever, unable to concentrate. So that feeling of frustration, if you're not careful, that could lead you to want to give up meditation and say, oh, this is too hard. I can't do it. I'm not going to even try. So that definitely is not a helpful way to go. So I think, so the point I'm trying to make is some unpleasant feelings or painful feelings that we have when we're meditating could be this kind here that are beneficial for our practice, but there could be some that are not. So we have to use our intelligence. And if you are feeling frustrated, getting frustrated about meditation for whatever reason, it's good to check with a teacher or with senior students. And they hopefully can guide you to understand what you're doing wrong and how to fix that. Okay, then the second unworldly feeling is pleasant. So an example of that would be a feeling of joy when meditating on loving kindness. So if you're doing a meditation on loving kindness, generating, again, that can sometimes be frustrating. People don't always get the feeling of loving kindness that they're trying to. But if you do manage to bring up a feeling of loving kindness, and then you're kind of sending it out to other people, other beings, and so on. So there's a really nice feeling there. It's really good. That would be a pleasant feeling that's unworldly or spiritual. Other examples would be if let's say you're working on anger, you're having trouble with anger, being angry at somebody, and you do a meditation and apply antidotes, and then you feel yourself being free of that anger. Okay, your mind gets released from that painful feeling of anger, and so that would probably also be a very pleasant feeling. or just when we're meditating sometimes, and we are able to keep our mind focused on our meditation object and things are going smoothly and we're having some good experiences. So, yeah, that would probably be a pleasant feeling. That would be unworldly or spiritual. And the neutral, the third one, the example of a neutral feeling is the feeling of equanimity. And this is when it's actually something that arises in the practice of calm abiding. Okay, so the feeling of equanimity here isn't the same as just any old neutral feeling, but in the practice of calm abiding, when you reach higher levels of concentration, and you don't have to put so much effort into dealing with the obstacles to concentration. Your concentration is just kind of flowing very smoothly. So at that time in your practice, you have this feeling of equanimity. And then higher levels of concentration as well. And so neutral feelings are more difficult to notice. And in fact, Bhikkhu Analayo points this out in his book. He says the Pali commentaries do talk about the difficulty of noticing neutral feelings and suggest that it can be done by inference, noting the lack of pleasant and unpleasant ones. Okay, so, you're practicing noticing your feelings and sometimes you notice a pleasant feeling, sometimes you notice an unpleasant feeling. But if there's no feeling, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, then you can infer that would be a neutral feeling. So that's how it's explained in the Pali commentaries. So anyway, this might be interesting for you to know that, yeah, this is another distinction among feelings. Some feelings are worldly, and mainly the ones that we have with our sense experiences, seeing, hearing, smelling, and so on. And they are the ones that would usually lead us to have attachment or aversion or other kinds of afflictions. And in that way, they keep us stuck in the world of samsara with all its sufferings, all its problems. But then there are also feelings that are unworldly or spiritual. Those are the ones that we have when we are engaged in Dharma practice and help us in our practice, especially when we have a pleasant feeling, when we are doing something positive, something virtuous, we feel good about it. We want to do it more. We want to do more of that. And the unpleasant or painful feelings that we have, like when we think about death and suffering, ideally those should motivate us to want to get out of suffering, to want to become free of these problems like death and suffering and so on. So those are also helpful for our spiritual practice, our Dharma practice. Okay, so next slide. So probably all of you have encountered the teachings about aggregates, or at least you've heard about aggregates. And the Buddha, I think Buddha didn't invent the aggregates, the 5 aggregates. I think it was already a way of explaining things even before the Buddha. So he just used that explanation. So each of us, each person is made up of aggregates, 5 aggregates. And the first aggregate is the form aggregate, which includes our body, our physical body. And then the other 4 aggregates are all different aspects of the mind. And feeling is aggregate number 2, and also discrimination. But those are both mental factors. Those are mental factors. And they are separated out, and each one is its own aggregate. But then all the other mental factors, they usually talk about 51 mental factors. So the other 49 mental factors are all lumped together in aggregate number 4, which is sometimes called compositional factors or miscellaneous factors. There's different terms for it. But anyway, aggregate number 4 includes all the other mental factors. And then aggregate number 5 is consciousness, the 6 types of consciousness that we have. So this is something I often wondered about. Why is it that 2 of the mental factors, out of 51 mental factors, 2 of them, feeling and discrimination, these are separate aggregates? What's so special about them? So I never came across an explanation until I did the master's program, and we studied this text, Treasury of Knowledge, or Abhidharma Kosha by Vasubandhu. And it really is a treasury of knowledge. There's so much information in that text, including this explanation of why those 2 mental factors are separate aggregates. So I was happy to come across this explanation, and it does give us a lot to think about. So this is a verse from Vasubandhu that gives an answer to this. So it says, because of being 1, the roots of arguments, and 2, the causes of cyclic existence, and 3, because of the reasons for the sequence, feelings and discriminations are posited as aggregates separate from the mental factors. So there's 3 reasons. And the first one is because they are roots of arguments. They are the cause of arguments. And just to be precise, what we're talking about here are feelings and discriminations that are in the minds of ordinary beings, ordinary sentient beings, not Buddhas, because Buddhas have feelings and arhats have feelings. So we're not talking about their feelings. We're talking about us ordinary beings who still have a lot of delusions, or the kind of feelings in our minds. So then the first reason, the roots of arguments. So there's a sutra that says, due to the cause that is attachment to the desirable, kings argue with kings, farmers with farmers, and householders with householders. So the explanation is that among lay people like kings and farmers and householders and so on, they often get into arguments because of feelings. People have feelings about things, and so different people have different feelings about things. I mean, one of the best examples of this is this horrible situation in the Middle East with the Israelis, the Palestinians. This conflict has been going on for decades, and it's just very difficult to see any end to it. And a lot of it is because of feelings. These 2 groups of people have feelings for that land, for certain places, certain geographical places in that part of the world, and they have their reasons, history, or no, we were here for hundreds of years, or whatever. So they have strong feelings for the land, and what took place in the past on that land, and so on. And so that is a big reason for this conflict. But you know, we probably all have our own experiences, like with neighbors, and your neighbor may like to play a certain kind of music that makes them feel happy. They have pleasant feelings for that type of music, but maybe for you, that type of music gives rise to unpleasant feelings. So, and so this could become a, you know, cause of an argument, conflict. Okay, so feelings then can give rise to arguments, conflicts within relationships, within families, between neighbors, between you know, political groups, uh, different communities, cities, countries, and so on and so forth. So this is why feelings are a separate aggregate, because they can give rise to arguments among lay people. And then the sutra quotation goes on to say, due to the cause that is attachment to views, the ordained argue with the ordained. So that's referring to discriminations. So the aggregate of discrimination, that's where we think, you know, we can see the differences between things. This is this, this is that. And that's involved in views, when we have different views about things. You know, I think like this, you think like that, I believe this, you believe that. And so discrimination is the mental factor involved there. And because of discriminations, different views that people have, that can also lead to arguments, not so much between ordinary people like householders and farmers, but between, it says here, ordained people, monastic people, or we could just say, you know, religious people in general. So, yeah, again, people have different religious viewpoints, and they cling very strongly to their viewpoints, and then that can become a basis for argument. And it could also be scholars, philosophers, scientists, and so on. So people who are more intellectual and have certain ideas about things, views about things, and then that can become a cause of arguments. And that could also lead to wars. Again, you know, violent arguments, especially with religious views. So that's the first reason, feeling and discrimination, because they can lead to arguments. And the second one is that they are the causes of cyclic existence. So with regard to feeling, we've already seen how you know, pleasant feelings can lead to attachment, desire. Unpleasant feelings can lead to anger, aversion, and then we act on the basis of those, create karma, and continue in cyclic existence. I think it's easy to see how feeling is a cause of cyclic existence. And with discrimination, that can also perpetuate cyclic existence, because if we have certain discrimination, certain views about things, like thinking that impermanent things are permanent, or thinking that things that are empty of inherent existence are inherently existing, and so on. So having certain views, certain conceptions about things that are erroneous, incorrect, then again, those can lead us to create non-virtue and perpetuate our existence in samsara. So that's these two mental factors that are very important for samsara, and also important for getting out of samsara, to be free of samsara. And then the third reason is, it says, because of the reasons for the sequence. This refers to the order of the aggregate. So they're always explained in a certain order. First is forms, and then feelings, and then discriminations. And this is because of subtlety. Um, form is the body aggregate, and that is easy to see. It's not subtle. We can see and touch our body. So that's why that's mentioned first. And then feelings is a little more subtle than the body, but it's still relatively easy to notice, to recognize feelings. Discriminations, again, more subtle. So as we go along through the aggregates, they become more and more subtle, more and more difficult to notice, to recognize. So that's another reason. And yeah, maybe that's good enough. But I think, particularly those first two reasons, it's helpful to understand the importance of those two mental factors, feeling and discriminations, such that they have their own aggregates separate from the others. Okay, so we've reached the halfway point in the class. And so let's take a break, 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and do some more. Anyone have a question you would like to ask? I can't see anyone, so maybe Effie, you can tell me if there's anyone who has a question.
I don't see anyone with a question.
Okay. We'll try
It's
again.
put your hand up or message me. But yeah, it doesn't look like any questions right now.
Okay, let's go on. Next slide. This is another teaching about feelings that is in Lama Tsongkhapa's text on the Lamrim, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, the Lamrim Chenmo. So I thought this is quite interesting. This comes in this section of the middle scope, which is all about developing renunciation of samsara and practicing what we need to do to get out of samsara. And so he's relating these three types of feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, with the three types of suffering. So you're probably familiar with that, but just to remind you, so the three types of suffering is suffering of suffering, which is obvious, unpleasant experiences we have. Then the suffering of change, pleasant experiences that don't last but disappear, and we end up with where we were before, unhappy and suffering. And then pervasive suffering, the third type, sometimes it's called the pervasive suffering of conditionality, pervasive compounded suffering. And that's simply our existence with this body and mind that are under the control of afflictions and karma. We're not free. That lack of freedom, but being trapped in this situation with afflictions and karma. Just that itself is a kind of suffering. Okay, so what he says, he starts with pleasant feelings, and he's saying contaminated pleasant feelings. So contaminated means they are connected with ignorance and karma and afflictions, unlike the feelings of Buddhas and arhats, highly realized beings. So ordinary beings like us, our feelings are contaminated. And so he says contaminated pleasant feelings are the suffering of change, like cool water on a wound. So he uses this analogy um, of an open wound. Actually, yeah, in the book it says a boil, but Geshe Zopa's commentary uses an open wound, which I thought maybe sounds more something we can relate to. So if we have an open wound on our skin, and if you put something cool on it, it's very soothing, it soothes the pain. So that's like pleasant feelings, ordinary beings, pleasant feelings, because they they don't last. Yeah, they just give us a short amount of pleasure for a short amount of time, but then they don't last forever. They go away, and we're back where we were before. So yeah. And Geshe Zopa says, this is the meaning of the suffering of change. All feelings of pleasure eventually change into suffering again. So they're not real lasting pleasure. Yeah. They're just momentary and rainbow-like, dream-like, illusion-like, not real and lasting. That's, ordinary pleasant experiences that we have in samsara, eating delicious food or watching a movie or having a nice, cup of coffee or whatever it is you like. Yeah, it just lasts a short amount of time, gives you a little bit of pleasure for a short amount of time, and then it's gone. The pleasure is gone, doesn't last, doesn't continue, doesn't really satisfy, just leaves you craving for more. Okay, then number 2, unpleasant or painful feelings are the suffering of suffering, like salt water on a wound. Okay, so ouch. You have an open, raw wound and you put salt on it or lemon juice. Yeah, it just makes it worse. It just gives you more suffering, more pain. And so that's obviously unpleasant. Yeah, something we want to get rid of as quickly as possible. And then the third, contaminated neutral feelings are the suffering of conditionality, or sometimes called pervasive compounded suffering. And that's like the wound itself. So just having the wound on your body, I mean, that itself is not a good thing. That's a really unpleasant thing. Okay, whether you put salt on it or you put something cool on it, it just, it's, you don't really want to have a wound. You want to get rid of this wound. And so the suffering of conditionality, again, that refers to just our situation in samsara, where we are not free to have the experiences that we want to have, to go where we want, to take rebirth where we want, and so on and so forth. We don't have choice, we don't have control, but rather it's our karma. It's karma and afflictions that throw us into the situation that we are in, like where we're born, and also the experiences we have in our life. Yeah, they just happen to us because of karma and afflictions. And so we're not free. It's like a lack of freedom. So wherever we are in samsara, even if you're in a really wonderful place, wonderful situation, lots of enjoyments, but you're still in samsara and you're not really free. So yeah, so that's like just having a wound and yeah, not being really peaceful and happy. So let's pause and do a little bit of meditation on this before we go on. So make yourselves comfortable but try to sit up straight. And also, if you're feeling sleepy, then better not to close your eyes, but keep them open a little. Let some light in, and that will help you to stay awake. But relax your body and mind, and let go of other thoughts so that you can just stay focused on what we're doing here. Okay, so the statement here is that contaminated pleasant feelings, meaning as ordinary beings who haven't realized emptiness, the true nature of things, then when we have pleasant feelings with any of our five senses or even with our thoughts, memories, and so on. So these pleasant feelings, even though there is some pleasure, some enjoyment there, but they are considered a type of suffering, the suffering of change, because they don't last. They last only a short time and then disappear. And we're back where we were before with unsatisfactoriness, restlessness, unhappiness, problems. So the pleasant feelings of samsara don't remove our suffering, don't remove our problems. They just give us a very short break, very short experience of pleasure, which then vanishes. You can't maintain it. So this is the suffering of change, one of the three types of suffering in samsara. So bring to mind an experience of pleasure that you've had today or sometime in the past, and see if you can recognize that this is true. And then the second statement is that unpleasant or painful feelings are the suffering of suffering, obvious suffering that anyone recognizes. You don't have to be told this is suffering. We know it. And this is compared to having a wound and then having something put on the wound like salt or lemon juice that increases the pain rather than soothes the pain. So it's clearly painful and something we want to be free of. And then the third type of feeling, neutral feeling, which is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. This is like the suffering of conditionality, the third type of suffering, which is simply being in samsara, being in this situation where we are not free to experience what we want, have our life the way we want it to be, everything goes the way we wish. That's not possible as long as we're in samsara. It's our karma and our afflictions that drive all that happens to us, all that happens in samsara. It's all under the control of karma and delusions, karma and afflictions. So we and all other sentient beings in samsara, this is our situation. We're not free, can't always have the happiness we want. We keep experiencing the suffering we don't want. This is the very nature of samsara. So neutral feelings aren't really unpleasant, but they're also not pleasant. And as long as our mind is still under the control of ignorance and other afflictions, not seeing things correctly, and even neutral feelings that we have are still a type of suffering. So the solution is to recognize that as long as we're in samsara, we will not experience any genuine, lasting happiness or peace. But there is a way out. The Buddha discovered a way to be free of samsara and attain enlightenment, and he taught us the way. By following his teachings, then we too can free ourselves from samsara and reach a state where we can help others to be free as well. So this teaching, the first of these three points, that contaminated pleasant feelings are the suffering of change. This can be a cause of feeling depressed, feeling despair, because, we can then think, so this means that there's no real pleasure, no real happiness in samsara, but I'm stuck in samsara and I'm going to probably be here for a long time. It takes a long time to get out of samsara. So that means, there's no happiness, there's no enjoyment, it's all suffering. And I'm going to be experiencing nothing but suffering for a long time. And so thinking in this way can lead to feeling depressed. And that's not a healthy or a positive state of mind. And we might even lose our energy to practice, and we won't have positive energy to share with other people, and so on. And so we need to be careful to avoid that. Don't go down that road. And the Dalai Lama, I'll just read something that he said about this. This is in the book called Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha Nature. It's volume 3 of that series called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. So in that book, he says, with all this talk about dukkha, dukkha meaning suffering, we may mistakenly believe that Dharma practitioners must relinquish all of their usual activities that bring them happiness, and that there is no happiness until we reach nirvana. This is not the case at all. In fact, it is important to have a happy mind while we practice the Dharma. Lama Yeshe used to say that too in the early days at Kopan, when he had this, first group of Western monks and nuns. He would sometimes say to us, be happy. You must be happy. I want you to be happy. I found it hard because I was thinking so much about suffering, all the suffering of samsara, all the delusion. It was hard to be happy. But yeah, it is important to be happy. We have to find a way to do it. Yeah, so he says, it is important to have a happy mind while we practice the Dharma. As we go deeper into practice, we realize that there are many types and levels of happiness and pleasure. Having food, shelter, clothing, medicine, and friends bring us some well-being, enough that we can practice the Dharma without being in dire suffering, which would make practice difficult. Yeah, so just the fact that we have food, we have clothes, we have shelter, we have friends, we have teachers, we have, many resources, many conditions with which we can enjoy life and also practice Dharma. So we need to appreciate those things and be happy that we have them. Not everybody has them. Then he says, as we practice more, we discover the pleasant, relaxed feelings that come from improving our concentration and the internal peace arising from living ethically. Yeah, so when we try to refrain from non-virtue and practice virtue, keep precepts, be a good person, be kind, then we feel good about ourselves. Yeah, there's a kind of happiness that comes from being a good person, doing good things, being kind to others. Yeah, so that's also a kind of happiness, Dharma happiness, spiritual happiness. As we lessen our attachment and open our hearts to others, the joy derived from connecting with others on a heart level and helping them brings a sense of fulfillment that is greatly superior to any sense pleasure that money and possessions can bring. So that's another level of happiness, when we are able to have love and compassion and, as much as we're able, and then show that to others, treat others in that way. So love and compassion bring a lot of joy, a lot of happiness. You can see the Dalai Lama, he's always looking happy, always looking, full of joy and very compassionate. So compassion and love bring that kind of joy. So there's different kinds of happiness we can experience as we practice Dharma, and it is important to have happiness and, yeah, to be able to continue practicing, to have the energy to keep going in our practice. We need that. And then Bhikkhu Analayo, in his book, he says, unlike his ascetic contemporaries, the Buddha did not categorically reject all pleasant feelings, nor did he categorically recommend unpleasant experiences for their supposedly purifying effect. So in many religions, this was going on at the time of the Buddha, and it's also gone on in human history. Some religious practitioners actually inflict suffering on themselves, right? You probably heard about this. Whipping themselves, cutting themselves, burning themselves, starving themselves, and so on. And the idea is that by doing those practices, they will purify their sins, purify their negative energy. Buddha didn't recommend that. We're fortunate. Yeah, just the opposite. You know, he said, don't do those things. Don't torture yourself. So instead of that, the Buddha placed emphasis on the mental and ethical consequences of all types of feeling. With the help of the above sixfold classification, means the, worldly and unworldly feelings, and 3 types of each, that makes 6. So this ethical dimension becomes apparent, uncovering in particular the relation of feelings to the activation of a latent mental tendency towards lust, irritation, or ignorance. Anyway, I won't continue with that. But anyway, the point is, the Buddha didn't say that we should suffer. The Buddha didn't want us to suffer. And ask us to do self torturing practices. And when we do embark on a spiritual path and spiritual practices, meditation practices, and so on, there's definitely pleasant feelings, good feelings that come from those. And if we experience those good feelings, we shouldn't be attached to them, but still they will give us the energy to go on, to keep going in our practice, do more and more practice. Okay, one more slide. This is about feeling and craving. So in the 12 links, this is the teaching on the 12 different factors that are the cause for us to stay in samsara, create karma, and take rebirth over and over and over again. And within those 12 links, one of them is feeling. It's link number 7. And it said that feeling leads to craving, which is link number 8. You probably heard this teaching before. So this is another role played by feeling. It's one of the 12 links that are the causes for keeping us in samsara. And it said that there are 3 types of craving. And so the 3 types of feeling lead to the 3 types of craving. So first, experiencing pleasure, pleasant feelings, this leads to craving for more pleasant feelings. So that's similar to what we've looked at before. Feeling leads to attachment. I have this good feeling and I want to have it again and again and again. And I want to have that object because it seems to be the cause of this good feeling. So yeah, craving for more. And then the second is unpleasant feelings or pain. Experiencing pain leads to craving to be separated from unpleasant feelings. Okay, so we can see that very easily in our experience when there's any kind of pain, physical pain, or any discomfort, anything unpleasant, anything we don't like, there's this craving to stop it, to get rid of it, to get away from it. I don't want this unpleasant feeling. I want it to stop. And then if we're not careful, that can develop further into anger. Yeah, we start feeling irritated, annoyed, and then that can grow more into anger, and then even into hatred, even into wanting to do something violent, destructive. Okay, but basically it's just this feeling of, I don't want this unpleasant feeling. That's a type of craving. And then the third is experiencing neutral feelings leads to craving for them to not diminish. So that's subtle. That's probably hard to recognize, but I think it's like, when we're kind of feeling okay and comfortable, maybe not really a lot of pleasure, but just, the status quo. Yeah. The situation that I'm in right now. It's kind of pleasant and kind of, yeah, the way I like things to be, and I want it to continue. I don't want it to change. So I think it's like that. There's this craving for a continuation of this situation. And it said that, yeah, so first there's the feeling, and then one of these three types of craving arises. And it said that if we can be aware, if we can notice this process, we can stop. There's like a gap between the feeling and the craving. And if we can become aware of that, we can break this chain of the 12 links. So in the book Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha Nature, it says the space between feeling and craving is one of the places where the forward motion of dependent origination can be broken. By being aware of feelings and noting them with introspective awareness, it's possible to prevent craving from arising in response to them. We practice observing feelings without reacting to them, observing how they arise and cease, and investigating where they abide. So again, it's not easy to recognize feelings. We have to train ourselves to be able to notice these feelings. They are happening in our minds, but we're not used to looking at them, noticing them. So part of the practice is to become aware of them, and how also to become aware of how they can lead to these three types of craving, and how this is one of the factors keeping us in samsara. And if we can stop this process from happening, not allow craving to arise in our mind, craving for pleasant feelings, for separation from unpleasant feelings, and so on, then we have a chance of cutting this process of the 12 links. Okay, there's just one last slide we'll look at, and then that will bring us to the end of this topic on feeling. So this is some more instructions from the Satipatthana Sutra. That's the sutra on the establishments of mindfulness. Buddha's own words on how to practice this. So he says, contemplate feelings as feelings internally. So feelings as feelings means just see them as they are, without thinking of them as, related to the world, or, how they fit into the world, but just seeing feelings as they are. And internally means within your own experience. So your own feelings, observe those, contemplate those. And then, so again, something we train in. And then the second one says, contemplate feelings as feelings externally. So externally means other people's feelings. So that's also part of the practice of mindfulness of feelings, is to notice that other people, other beings have these same kind of feelings that we do. They sometimes have a pleasant feeling, sometimes an unpleasant feeling, sometimes a neutral feeling. I mean, it doesn't mean we have to have clairvoyance and look into their minds and see what's going on in their minds, but we can usually, by people's body language, expression on their face, if they look like this, then they're probably having an unpleasant feeling. If they look like this, then they're probably having a pleasant feeling. So anyway, the point is, we don't just contemplate our own feelings, but we also contemplate other people and other beings, and that they have these feelings as well. And one benefit of that is compassion. We can have more compassion. We can become more aware of the suffering, that others experience, and how they don't always have the happiness and pleasure they would like to have. And then third is contemplate feelings as feelings both internally and externally. So that means you alternate. So at certain times you're contemplating your own feelings, at other times you're contemplating the feelings of others. Then the next one, contemplate the arising and passing away of feelings. So this means you try to notice how they arise. They weren't there before, and then they arise, and then they pass away. They don't last. So this is related to impermanence. Feelings arise and pass. They're not permanent, fixed, always there. And then next is contemplate there are feelings. So what this means is that after practicing this for some time, you can stop focusing on feelings as being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and how they arise and pass, and simply be mindful that there is feeling, and experience feelings as impersonal phenomena instead of my feelings, having this strong sense of I have these feelings, these are my feelings. So try to do away with that sense of self or I, and just notice them as these mental states, mental factors arising and passing. And then the last one is abide freely, not clinging to anything in the world. So, as a result of doing this practice for a long period of time, getting accustomed to it, getting familiar with it, then we can simply observe feelings arising and passing in an impersonal way, not identifying with them, and have this sense of freedom, not clinging to anything. So these are just different levels of practice that we can do with regard to feelings, and good to start with the first one, which is to simply become aware of feelings. And when we do become aware of feelings, understand that they are impermanent. They arise and pass. They're not permanent. They're not fixed. And we can also start to become familiar with them as simple mental states that arise and pass, and not me, not who I am. They are just things happening in my mind because of causes and conditions. And we don't have to grasp at them, buy into them, identify with them, So that's also very helpful, is to learn to de-identify with feelings. People can get so attached to their feelings, my feelings, you hurt my feelings. Big sense of ego there. So it's good to reduce that feeling of ego, and just see them as phenomena, mental phenomena arising and passing, and learn how to relate to them with more wisdom and more skill. Okay, so I think I've shared quite a bit of material about feelings. You may not be able to understand all of it or practice all of it, but hopefully some of it those make sense and are things that you can start to practice. And it said that this this practice of the close placement of mindfulness on feelings is correlated with the second of the Four Noble Truths, which is true origins or true causes. So doing this practice causes us to engage with true origins. Do you understand why? Would someone like to explain why that is? No?
Sorry, things are very quiet.
Yes, this group is a very quiet group. Well, true origins, which is the second noble truth, that is an explanation of where suffering comes from. What are the causes? What are the origins of suffering? All the unwanted, unpleasant experiences in the world, in our lives, and so on. Where does it all come from? What's the cause of it all? Why is it there? And so the Buddha's answer to that question is it comes from our own mind. Our afflictions or delusions, like the three poisons, greed, hatred, ignorance, and also karma, which we create karma on the basis of those three delusions, three afflictions. Our mind gets caught up in them, and then we act out and create karma. So those are the origins of suffering, the causes of suffering, delusions and karma. And so what we learn in this practice of the close placement of mindfulness of feelings is that we have these feelings all the time, all day long, every minute, every second. We're having pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, neutral feelings, just constantly coming and going. And pleasant feelings usually lead to attachment. That's one of the delusions, one of the causes of suffering. Okay. And then unpleasant feelings usually lead to aversion, anger, hatred, another of the causes of suffering. So those delusions, which are the cause of suffering, the origin of suffering, arise due to feelings. Feelings is one of the causes, one of the factors. Of course, there are other factors, but that's one of them. And so if we can become more aware of this, we can become, notice what's going on in our mind, then we can do something about it. And even if we have a pleasant feeling, we can learn to not let that turn into desire, greed, grasping, craving, which is just going to bring more suffering. And even if we have an unpleasant feeling, we don't have to let that turn into anger, hostility, aggressiveness, and so on, which is so unpleasant and also another cause of suffering. So we learn we have choices. We don't have to follow these old patterns that we've been following all our life. And becoming aware of feelings gives us a key, gives us a tool that will help us reduce our suffering, create less suffering. Okay, so I'll stop there. And if there's any questions anyone would like to ask, please, you can unmute and ask.
Min has his hand up. Min, you want to go ahead?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Min.
Thank you, thank you. I have a quick question. So, um, I think that one of the I think when we practice, or at least when I practice, one of the way that I know if my spiritual practice is progressing is usually that I can identify that my mind has more pleasant feelings, right? So relaxed state of mind is a pleasant state of mind. Equanimity is a pleasant state of mind. Concentration is a pleasant state of mind. So I know that I am progressing in my meditation is that when I have more pleasant state of mind than unpleasant one. But then if we basically identify on our sensation of feeling as suffering, then I'm not yeah, um like does it make our experience of our existing experience very miserable? It's basically what the Pope say. Oh, these Buddhists are so miserable. They have happy feeling is suffering, unhappy feeling is suffering, neutral is also suffering too, so it's all suffering.
Well, I did read what His Holiness said about that, and he said that no, we shouldn't think like that. We shouldn't think, oh, there's nothing but suffering and it's all suffering. That's just going to bring us down. I think the reason for talking about how pleasant feelings are actually another type of suffering is to get us to realize that as long as we're in samsara, as long as our mind is still trapped within samsara, meaning we still have afflictions, we still have ignorance mainly, and karma. As long as we're in that situation, then we don't have real, genuine, lasting happiness. So we don't want to get attached to the pleasant feelings, right? So even the pleasant feelings that come from meditation or being loving, practicing generosity, and so on. If we get attached to those pleasant feelings and then don't continue to practice and free ourselves from samsara, then we'll just continue to be in samsara. So I think it's a reminder that we have to keep working on overcoming our afflictions until we have completely rooted out all of them, especially ignorance. But that doesn't mean we should just, be miserable and depressed all the time and think, oh, there's no happiness. It is important to be happy. It is important to have the joy, as long as it's, pure happiness, happiness that comes from Dharma practice and helping others and not from non-virtuous things. So, yeah, to have that kind of happiness, we need it to be happy ourselves, to have energy to keep practicing Dharma, to be able to give good energy to other people, and so on. So we need that kind of happiness. But the point is, don't get stuck in that, attached to that kind of happiness alone and not go further. Yeah. So I think we should probably stop because we still have some prayers. Oh, is there
We have one more question from Wangmo.
Yeah. Okay. Wangmo, where are you?
Hi, thank you for the teachings. Yeah, so helpful. I was thinking about as I start to practice more what you've offered here around noticing feelings and doing these sorts of meditations more regularly. Do you think that it will it's supportive? It seems like it might be supportive of also deepening understanding of just dependent arising and kind of getting more comfortable with just the way things exist and relaxing the grasping. Does that make sense?
So you're asking if this kind of practice of the four establishments of mindfulness will help us understand dependent arising?
Yes.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that term hasn't been used so much here, but we're looking at a lot of causes and effects, like feeling gives rise to, afflictions and craving and so on. It's part of the 12 links. So, dependent arising, teaching them dependent arising are really there all throughout the Buddhist teachings. How this leads to that. And if we can stop this, we can stop that. So yeah, I haven't spoken so much about emptiness. I'll do that more, later as we get further in these practices. But there's ways of bringing in emptiness of self, emptiness of phenomena, and so on. So, okay, so let's finish and do the prayers to dedicate the merit, the positive energy we've created from coming together and looking at these teachings. Share these with all living beings.
May the world be happy, the years good, and grains increase, the Dharma flourish, every happiness and bliss arise, and every wish in the mind be fulfilled. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Prataka Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Munis' precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the virtuous ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, especially to you, Venerable Sangye Khadro. Thank you. See you, everyone, next week.
Thank you, Effie, for
Thank you. Thank you.